Friday nights were sacred. After months of staying late at work, eating dinner over spreadsheets, and falling asleep with unanswered emails blinking on his phone, he finally had a weekend to himself. He cleaned the house earlier that day, shut down his laptop with a sense of ceremony, and planned nothing more ambitious than a hot shower, a movie, and silence. His living room felt like a sanctuary, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed his shoulders to relax. Then his phone rang. The name flashing on the screen instantly tightened his chest, his sister. She didn't call to ask how he was doing. She never did. Her voice carried the same entitled tone he had known since childhood. She needed him to do one little favor, as she always phrased her demands. Her children were restless, she was exhausted, and she wanted a few hours to herself. Could he babysit? Just tonight. Just this once. He knew better. Every just tonight became 3 days, every request came with manipulation, and every act of kindness turned into an obligation stamped as family duty. He took a breath, swallowed the guilt she tried to inject into her words, and said no. She didn't argue. That alone unsettled him. She simply went silent, muttered something about him being selfish, and hung up. He leaned back on the couch, knowing her silence was rarely peaceful. It was the kind that carried consequences. Still, he convinced himself it was over. Families had boundaries, and he had finally set his. He returned to his quiet night, cooked himself a decent meal, and felt the rare joy of controlling his own time. By 11 o'clock, the street outside his house was usually deserted. That made the sound of a car engine unusual. When headlights stopped in front of his driveway, he frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. The knock on the door was impatient, almost urgent. He opened it and froze. A taxi driver stood there, holding the hands of 2 crying children. His nephew and niece. Their faces were red from tears, their clothes wrinkled, and each clutched a small toy like it was their only possession. Behind them, the trunk of the taxi was open, revealing a single suitcase. The driver exhaled loudly, clearly annoyed. He explained that the children's mother had paid him in advance to bring them here and leave them. No instructions, no explanation, no return fare. The narrator felt his stomach tighten. He looked around, half expecting his sister to appear laughing, claiming this was a joke. But the street was empty, the night still, and the driver was already shifting his weight impatiently. The children stared up at him as though he were the only stable thing left in their world. Reluctantly, he took hold of the suitcase. It was heavier than expected. Without thinking, he carried it inside while the taxi sped away, leaving dust behind. Once indoors, he tried to calm the children, offering water and a place to sit. Their silence was unsettling. They didn't ask for their mother. They didn't explain. They merely watched him with wide, fearful eyes. He finally examined the suitcase. The name tag bore the older child's name. When he opened it, confusion hit him harder than the surprise of their arrival. The suitcase contained clothing, shoes, and toiletries, but only for one child. The younger child had nothing. No pajamas, no toothbrush, not even a spare pair of socks. It was as if someone had forgotten the existence of this second child entirely. His mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. 2 children were standing in his house, yet someone had deliberately prepared luggage for only one. That detail wasn't an accident. It was a warning, one he didn't yet understand, but one he knew would change his life before the weekend ended. The moment the taxi disappeared down the street, he reached instinctively for his phone. His first call to his sister rang until it disconnected. He tried again, and this time, the line went directly to voicemail. His pulse quickened. She always picked up when she wanted something. Silence usually meant strategy. He stared at the children, 2 small figures sitting rigidly on his couch, eyes darting nervously toward the door as though someone might burst in at any moment. He dialed again, hoping this was some misunderstanding, something that could be reversed with a single conversation. Before the call connected, a notification appeared. A voice message. 9 minutes long. His gut tightened. Lengthy messages from her never brought peace, only accusations. He pressed play. Her voice filled the room, sharp, emotional, and calculated. She called him selfish, ungrateful, and weak. She listed every favor she claimed to have done for him, twisting half-truths into emotional shackles. She accused him of abandoning family, of choosing personal comfort over responsibility, of lacking compassion. Then she dropped the bomb. She was boarding a plane, leaving the country for a life-changing opportunity. She said she had sacrificed too much already and deserved to live for herself. The children were now his problem. She wouldn't be taking them back. His hands trembled. That wasn't babysitting. That was abandonment. He replayed the final part twice, unable to accept the coldness in her tone when she said, "They'll be better off with you." "I've already signed what needed to be signed." "Signed what?" He wanted to ask, but she had already blocked his number by the time he checked. The children, who had pretended not to listen, sat frozen. He approached them gently, kneeling so they could see his face. They didn't look relieved to be safe. They looked terrified to be anywhere. Their shoulders were tense, their breathing shallow, and every sound from outside made them flinch. Something was wrong far beyond the irresponsibility of a mother escaping her duties. He tried asking simple questions. Were they hungry? Did they know where their mother was? Had she told them how long they would stay? The younger child, barely old enough to form complex sentences, buried his face into his sister's arm. The older one pressed her lips together, hesitating. She looked at him with a maturity no child should have, as if calculating the risk of speaking. Finally, in a voice so faint he almost missed it, she whispered, "Mommy said you'll take care of us forever, because Daddy can't." The statement lodged itself in his chest like a shard of glass. The room seemed to shrink around him. Forever? Why would anyone say that? Why couldn't their father take care of them? He tried to ask what she meant, but the girl shut down immediately. Her eyes filled with panic, and her hands began to shake. She clutched her brother closer, as though words alone could summon something she feared. He realized this wasn't a spontaneous trip or a dramatic mood swing. This was planned. His sister hadn't asked him to babysit. She had selected him as a destination. The suitcase with clothing for only one child, the sudden departure, the blocked number, the cryptic message, all of it pointed toward something deliberate, something far more unsettling than irresponsibility. He stood and paced the room, energy trapped under his skin. His sister wasn't impulsive, she was calculating. If she had left the country, she didn't plan to return. If she had signed documents, they involved him. And if their father couldn't, there was a story behind that silence. Whatever secrets these children carried were not childish exaggerations. Their mother had left them like evidence at his door. And whether he wanted to be part of it or not, he had just become a piece of a much larger puzzle, one that was only beginning to reveal its edges. Saturday morning arrived, but instead of the calm he expected, the house felt like a pressure cooker. The children woke up before dawn, already dressed, as if prepared for evacuation. He found them sitting in the hallway, eyes fixed on the front door, waiting for something or someone. Their silence didn't resemble shyness, it pulsed with dread. When he offered breakfast, they barely touched their food, eating quickly and hiding leftovers in napkins as though meals were unpredictable luxuries. Every clatter of a dish made them jump. As the morning progressed, the phone rang several times. Each time it did, the older child bolted upright, grabbed her younger brother's hand, and dragged him into a corner, shaking violently, whispering something he couldn't hear. By the fourth call, she pleaded with him not to answer. He hesitated. Her reaction wasn't normal childhood fear, it was survival instinct. He silenced the phone and watched her shoulders relax only slightly, as if danger had been delayed, not removed. Their behavior escalated throughout the day. When he suggested they play outside, they refused, insisting the windows stay closed. Later, he caught them carefully removing any paper that displayed their full names, school certificates, labels inside jackets, even birthday cards he found tucked inside the suitcase. They tore their names into tiny pieces and flushed them down the toilet, checking repeatedly to make sure nothing remained. Their precision was chilling. No child invents rituals of anonymity unless someone taught them the consequences of being found. He tried conversation. He spoke gently, encouraged them to trust him, told them they were safe. But the children responded with fragmented sentences, abruptly stopping themselves mid-thought. Words like the room, the papers, and night visits surfaced, then vanished behind trembling lips. When he asked who told them to destroy documents, the older one shut her eyes tightly, as if the question itself was forbidden. That evening, he decided to stay with them until they fell asleep. The younger child eventually dozed off, but the older one remained awake, her gaze drifting repeatedly toward the window. The curtains were drawn, yet she seemed to expect something beyond them. He asked what she was afraid of. She hesitated, biting her lips so hard it almost bled. Finally, in a voice so thin it barely stirred the air, she said, "We aren't allowed to talk about what happened at the old house. If we do, someone will come for us." He sat frozen. The sentence felt rehearsed, not spoken for the first time. She was repeating an instruction, one etched in fear. He tried to reassure her, insisting no one knew they were here. Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide with a certainty no child should have. "They always know," she whispered. Those words unsettled him deeply. His sister wasn't just irresponsible, she was hiding from something serious. Maybe a person, maybe an institution, maybe a situation she couldn't control. Whatever haunted her children didn't come from imagination. Their fear had structure, rules, and consequences. That meant someone had imposed it. He spent the night thinking, replaying every detail since Friday. The suitcase packed for only one child. The blocked number. The voice message. The unnamed father who can't. The panic triggered by ringing phones. None of it pointed toward an overwhelmed parent. It pointed toward someone escaping a threat. By Sunday, he no longer wondered whether his sister was avoiding responsibility. He wondered if she was avoiding detection. Children don't invent rules about silence unless punishment has already proven itself real. And as he watched the older child stand guard by the door while her brother slept, he understood something chilling. This wasn't the beginning of a family dispute. This was the aftermath of something that should never have involved him, yet now depended entirely on him to unravel. Monday arrived like a verdict. The narrator had barely slept, pacing the halls through most of the night, unsure what to do or who to call. The children lay awake as well, flinching at every sound from outside. By morning, the tension in the house was so thick it seemed to alter the air itself. He tried distracting them with breakfast, cartoons, even a promise to visit the park, but they refused to move more than a few steps away from him, clinging to him as if separation guaranteed danger. A firm knock at the door cracked through the uneasy calm. 3 measured taps, too controlled to be casual. The children stiffened instantly. The older one grabbed her brother and pulled him behind the couch. They covered their ears, trembling. Their reaction was so immediate, so primal, that he felt something claw at the back of his throat. Whoever was outside wasn't a stranger to them. He approached the door slowly, peering through the peephole. A man stood there, impeccably dressed in a perfectly pressed gray suit, not a wrinkle in sight. His shoes were polished, his hair combed with deliberate precision. He didn't look like a friend, but he didn't look like a threat either. He looked like someone used to being obeyed. The narrator opened the door only a little, enough to speak, but not enough to invite entry. The man smiled pleasantly, though his eyes remained cold and unblinking. He addressed the children by their full names, middle names included, and asked calmly to speak with them. He introduced himself as a representative of a private institution specializing in family transitions, saying he was conducting a welfare follow-up. It wasn't what he said that was unsettling, it was how he said it. His tone was polished, rehearsed, and practiced, as if the words belonged to a script rather than a conversation. He asked where the children were, whether their mother had made contact, and if the narrator had noticed unusual emotional behavior. The question slipped from polite curiosity into interrogation so smoothly that it took a moment to recognize the shift. The narrator's instincts prickled. He stepped further into the doorway, blocking the interior. He explained that no one could speak to the children without legal authorization. The man smiled again, unfazed, and replied that authorization had already been granted, but that the documents were in transit. When pressed for identification, the man produced a sleek card, no logo, no name, only a phone number printed in stark black digits. A business card without an identity wasn't professional, it was deliberate. A signal. A warning. When the narrator refused entry, the man's expression remained polite, but the temperature behind his eyes dropped. His smile tightened. "Children often misunderstand their circumstances," he said softly, as though offering advice. "Their memories can cause complications." It was the most chilling line the narrator had ever heard. He shut the door firmly. The latch clicked with the full weight of finality. Immediately, soft sobs erupted behind him. The children had emerged from their hiding place, shaking uncontrollably. The younger one begged him not to let the man take them. The older child whispered that he was from the house and that once he found them, things never stopped. The narrator knelt beside them, trying to calm their trembling bodies. Their terror wasn't theatrical, it was practiced. Learned. Conditioned. Whoever that visitor was, he wasn't searching out of duty. He was following a trail. The business card lay on the floor where he had dropped it. No company. No address. Only numbers. Numbers that felt less like a contact and more like a countdown. For the first time, he understood something terrifying. His sister hadn't abandoned her children because she wanted freedom. She abandoned them because someone was coming. And now that someone had their location. After the unsettling encounter at the door, the narrator realized he could no longer rely on assumptions. If his sister had dragged him into something, he needed to understand the scope of it. The children's fear wasn't vague, it was anchored in something real. And the only piece of tangible evidence in his possession was the suitcase, the same one packed for only one child. He carried it into the dining room, took a deep breath, and opened it once more, determined to examine every inch of its contents. He emptied the clothing onto the table, unfolding shirts, turning pockets inside out, and shaking out shoes. Nothing seemed unusual, yet one detail drew his attention. The suitcase felt heavier than the belongings justified. He flipped it over and noticed the base was thicker than normal. Running his fingers along the fabric, he detected a subtle seam, almost invisible. He retrieved a small knife and carefully pried it open. The lining lifted, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were documents, dozens of them, neatly stacked in sealed envelopes. Some bore official seals, others were stamped with red ink. His pulse quickened as he spread them out. Birth certificates, custody papers, legal notices, and something more disturbing, forms transferring guardianship to him. His name was printed in bold letters, first, middle, last, linked to responsibilities he had never agreed to shoulder. The signatures looked authentic. The dates aligned. The ink was fresh. He scanned the papers repeatedly, trying to absorb the truth. The children's biological father wasn't listed anywhere. In fact, according to these documents, legally, the father was unknown, which contradicted what he had always been told. Worse still, attached to the guardianship forms was an order indicating that the sister had initiated the transfer herself. She had declared him willing and capable, presenting him as a stable adult relative ready to assume full responsibility. He hadn't been asked. He had been appointed. His stomach tightened. This wasn't a temporary arrangement. It wasn't even abandonment. It was a legal handoff, one she intended to vanish from. As he processed the implications, he heard footsteps behind him. The younger child stood there, clutching a stuffed toy, eyes swollen from crying. The narrator knelt down, gently asking why their mother had left these documents. The boy hesitated, his tiny fingers twisting the toy's ear. When he finally spoke, his words were barely audible. "Mommy didn't want to sign them," he muttered. "He made her." She cried. "He said if she didn't sign, Daddy would disappear forever." The narrator froze. "Who made her sign?" The boy swallowed hard. His voice cracked. "The man in the gray suit. He came to our old house. He said we were supposed to go with him, not Mommy. Mommy didn't want him to take us." He yelled. She signed the papers. After that, Daddy didn't come home again. The sentence hit him like a bullet. The man who had stood on his doorstep wasn't a stranger claiming to help with family transitions. He was part of whatever forced his sister to surrender her children. Their father's absence wasn't an accident, it was leverage. The narrator looked back at the documents and noticed something chilling. One paper wasn't complete. A follow-up signature, his signature, was required to finalize full transfer. Without it, the legal process was suspended, not void. He wasn't just an inconvenience. He was an obstacle. The knock on Monday hadn't been a welfare check. It had been a retrieval attempt. His sister hadn't abandoned her responsibilities. She had gambled with the only currency she had left, her children's future, and placed him unknowingly at the center of a battle he didn't understand. And now, whoever wanted those kids knew exactly where to find them. The narrator spent the rest of the day staring at the pile of documents spread across his dining table, trying to piece together the scale of what his sister had done. The children stayed close, alert to any sound from outside, while he replayed every interaction he had ever had with their mother, her sudden disappearances, her unpredictable anger, her fixation on maintaining appearances. None of it seemed random anymore. It was as if every chaotic decision she had made had been steps toward a single outcome. He just hadn't known he was part of it. Near dusk, his phone vibrated. Her name appeared on the screen, unblocked this time. His heart thudded. He answered without greeting. Her voice came through immediately, shallow breaths, words tumbling with urgency. There was no remorse, no acknowledgement of the chaos she had caused. Instead, she sounded cornered. "You have to keep them," she began. "It's safer this way. You don't understand what's happening." He demanded to know what she had dragged him into. Her initial silence wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. Then, with a sigh that sounded more like resignation than regret, she confessed that she was under investigation. Authorities were circling around her for financial fraud tied to her ex-husband's company. She claimed she had been framed, that she only signed documents and never handled any actual transactions. But her tone lacked conviction, and the narrator recognized the practiced cadence of someone who had rehearsed excuses long before consequences arrived. She went further. She explained that the investigation wasn't only about money. Witnesses had disappeared. Files had been destroyed. Her ex-husband had vanished without explanation, leaving her dangling as the last visible thread. According to her, placing the children under his custody was a protective maneuver. If authorities found them with her, they would be seized as evidence, leverage in a larger case. With him, however, they were outside the radius of suspicion. Her plan was clear. She expected him to become a silent guardian, an unwilling accomplice who shielded both her children and her secrets. She spoke as though he owed her this role, as though being older, more stable, and less impulsive made him automatically responsible for her mistakes. He told her he wouldn't participate in anything illegal. He wasn't going to lie for her, hide children from authorities, or pretend ignorance. Her tone shifted instantly. Gone was the desperation, replaced by raw fear. Not fear of prison or scandal, but something far more personal. "You can't let them talk," she hissed. "They don't understand what they saw. They'll ruin everything." Those words chilled him. Children don't threaten legal cases unless they witness something that shouldn't exist. He pressed her, demanding clarity, but she avoided specifics. Instead, she repeated a single instruction like a mantra: keep them quiet. Her panic spiked whenever he asked what happened at the old house. "They don't know what they're saying," she insisted. "Children exaggerate. If they talk, people will start asking questions, and then it doesn't stop." Her voice cracked. The narrator finally understood. She wasn't afraid of losing her freedom. She was afraid of exposure. The siblings hadn't been merely unsettled by change, they were traumatized. Their silence wasn't obedience, it was survival. They hadn't been hiding names because of fear of custody battles. They were hiding identities to avoid being found by the same forces that had cornered their mother. The narrator looked at the two children huddled in his living room, smaller than the situation consuming them, and felt something shift inside him. His sister hadn't protected them. She had abandoned them as her last line of defense. The call ended with her final plea: "Don't betray me. If they talk, everything falls apart." He placed the phone down slowly, realizing the truth she had failed to consider. Her plan depended on him being silent. But silence was no longer an option. The next morning, the narrator woke with a clarity he hadn't possessed before. Fear had become purpose. He could no longer rely on assumptions, whispered warnings, or fragments of conversation. The children were not safe in limbo, nor could he remain vulnerable to a system he didn't understand. He called a lawyer recommended by a colleague, an expert in family law with decades of experience disentangling complicated custody cases. After reviewing the documents he had discovered in the suitcase, the lawyer's expression tightened. The signatures, the dates, the incomplete transfer, everything suggested that his sister had attempted to legally offload her children onto him without his knowledge. Worse still, the paperwork indicated an active dispute regarding guardianship, a dispute involving unnamed parties. The lawyer advised immediate action. Waiting would leave room for others to intervene, especially whoever the man in the gray suit represented. Together, they filed for temporary legal custody, citing child abandonment and potential danger. The judge, disturbed by the evidence and the children's obvious trauma, granted provisional guardianship pending a full investigation. The narrator walked out of the courthouse holding a document he never expected to possess, a piece of paper that legally made him responsible for 2 young lives. News of the custody filing reached his sister faster than expected. She resurfaced online, not to apologize, but to retaliate. On social media, she painted herself as a loving mother wrongfully stripped of her children by a jealous sibling. She posted old family photos, drafted emotional captions about betrayal, and claimed she was the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by her ex-husband's enemies. Comments flooded in sympathy, outrage, arguments, yet none of the digital noise reflected the truth. She weaponized public perception, hoping pressure would force him to return the children and restore her narrative. But as the official investigation intensified, her carefully constructed version of events began to collapse. Authorities uncovered inconsistencies in her financial records, traced funds diverted from her ex-husband's company into offshore accounts, and identified employees who had mysteriously left their jobs after meeting with her. Evidence no longer suggested innocence, it pointed to complicity. Meanwhile, the children watched everything unfold from the safety of his home, oscillating between fear and relief. Slowly, therapy sessions and routine replaced panic. They began to sleep without nightmares. The younger child stopped clutching his belongings as though preparing for escape. The older one started drawing pictures, not of monsters or locked rooms, but of houses with open doors. Their silence began to crack, replaced by fragile words that hinted at secrets they had carried far too long. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang again. This time, the narrator was not alone. 2 uniformed officers stood hidden to the side of the porch, out of sight from the peephole. The man in the gray suit stood at the door, confident, composed, expression unchanged from his previous visit. He asked, in the same unnervingly calm voice, to take the children. He had documents, he claimed, authority, instructions, rights of retrieval. The narrator stepped back, and the officers emerged. The composure in the man's face shattered in an instant. His eyes darted, his posture stiffened, and he attempted to leave. He didn't make it past the walkway. The officers detained him, citing active warrants related to coercion, falsified records, and disappearance of a corporate employee, someone connected to the children's biological father. Watching the arrest triggered something in the children. The older one burst into tears, not of fear, but of release. For the first time, she began to talk freely. She described late-night meetings in their old house, documents exchanged, arguments between adults, and a room their father had never returned from. She spoke of threats disguised as promises and signatures extracted under duress. Their voices didn't just corroborate evidence. They unlocked it. The investigation expanded beyond fraud, touching something darker, an operation built on exploitation, secrecy, and the belief that children couldn't speak. They had spoken now, and in doing so, they had rewritten the destiny of everyone connected to them, including the man who finally chose to protect them. Months passed, each one pulling the truth further into the light. Court hearings, statements, and documents forged a narrative his sister could no longer bend into her favor. Her online accusations collapsed under the weight of forensic evidence, sworn testimonies, and the unsettling details the children finally revealed. With every session, the judge's patience wore thinner. The facade she built, one made of lies, theatrics, and pity, crumbled faster than she could rebuild it. The final custody hearing was quieter than anyone anticipated. No grand gestures, no dramatic speeches, just a ruling that felt inevitable. His sister sat rigidly at the defendant's table, eyes flicking from the judge to her attorney, searching for any sign of reversal. None came. The judge declared her unfit for custody, citing abandonment, emotional manipulation, and endangerment. The decision was permanent. The children were placed under the narrator's full guardianship. The moment the gavel fell, his sister's face froze in disbelief. She had orchestrated this entire scheme believing she could control the outcome. She assumed her brother was a temporary placeholder, a name to place on documents until she resurfaced with a new plan. She thought he would bend or break under the weight of her decisions. She had underestimated him, and more importantly, she had misjudged what children meant to him. Outside the courthouse, she cornered him. Her voice trembled, not with remorse, but rage born from defeat. She accused him of betrayal, called him selfish, claimed he had stolen her future. She spat out old insults, the same ones she'd hurled for years, that he was incomplete, incapable of starting a family, a man who would never be a father. She expected her words to wound him like they once did. They didn't. He listened calmly, not because her words lacked venom, but because they finally held no truth. Her insults had been forged from ignorance, but life had refuted them. The children stood beside him, not because he had taken them, but because she had given them away. Not by accident, not through oversight, but through choices rooted in selfishness and fear. In trying to rid herself of her burdens, she had unknowingly handed him what he lacked, a family. That was the twist she never predicted. For years, infertility had been a quiet ache in his chest, a truth he carried silently. It had shaped relationships, ended some, and lingered as a shadow behind every holiday, birthday, and celebration involving children. His sister had mocked it, using it as ammunition whenever she wanted to remind him of his perceived inadequacy. To her, fatherhood was something she had and he never would. But now, those same children clung to his hand, not out of obligation, but trust. They found safety in his home, comfort in his presence, and stability in his decisions. He became the voice they listened to, the person they turned to when fear returned. Without planning it, without seeking it, he stepped into a role no paperwork had ever promised, one born from love rather than biology. He didn't respond to his sister's accusations. He didn't argue or explain. He simply walked away. Her anger echoed in the parking lot, but for the first time, it didn't follow him. She had lost more than custody. She had lost control. Later that night, he watched the children asleep on the couch, curled under blankets, faces peaceful. The chaos of the past weeks had finally settled into something resembling a future. Their presence no longer felt like an intrusion, but an anchor. His sister's plan had been designed to shield herself. Instead, it had carved a new identity for him. She tried to dump her problems at his doorstep. Instead, she delivered him his purpose.